Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland, and I am one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me to discuss the Mandalorian, The Return, is Stephen Tolafield and Gregory Pang. We've both talked about the Mandalorian before, but Stephen and Gregory haven't been on at the same time before. So we have them together. We have our A-team, we have our trio, and we're going to talk about The Return. Gentlemen, starting with Greg, what did you think?
I love this episode. I absolutely adored it. The scene where Bo-Katan is leading the charge in the air and the armor is right behind her, and then it did not come true with all the rumors of is the armor the quote unquote spy stuff like that. No, man, Lady Kryze, your reinforcements has arrived. That was like second to only On Your Left in Endgame, right? That was just awesome. I just love the episode, and I'm very excited to talk legal issues, and especially with you two gentlemen.
Stephen, what did you think?
Totally agree. There's so much action, and Baby Yoda was sort of quintessential cute. Baby Yoda was awesome. I really enjoyed it, and it's been a couple of weeks since I've been here, so I'm so glad I was able to make it back for the finale and check in with you guys. I'm glad to chat about it.
So I loved it. It felt like it was made by people playing with action figures, and I'm down with that. But Stephen, you were in Celebration Europe, so why don't you tell us how that went before we dig into the legal issues?
It was super fun. I had a really, really good time. The experience was great. It was a 4-day celebration, which was good. And London, I hadn't been to London in a really long time. That was great. Did a couple of the fan meetups were really fun. And that was probably some of the highlights, but it was great to see the opening panel where they announced the new films. The Obi-Wan panel was incredible. There was just a lot of really good stuff to go around there. It was great.
Yeah, I haven't been to London since I was 2, so
Yeah.
I have no memory of it.
Yeah.
And what else stood out about the experience? Because I did Anaheim.
Yeah.
But we did Anaheim, but
Right.
you were like the one out of our group who could go this time around. What did you see?
Yeah. I'll say that the convention center was kind of weirdly crowded in some points. It got a little close a couple times in ways that weren't super comfortable. But the panel rooms were largely pretty comfortable and held a lot of people, and it was great to be able to participate in a lot of those. I really enjoyed the celebration store this time. I didn't get a Lightspeed Lane reservation until Sunday, so I was a little worried about getting anything other than picked over things, but there seemed like the inventory was pretty good. I was able to do some really fun kind of shopping for not just me, but for other people too, and got some autographs, and that was really fun. So being on the convention floor was always a big highlight.
What autographs did you get?
I went to I didn't do any of the photo ops or sort of celebrity autographs. It was more for books. So the Timelines book and the 100 Objects book. I got to meet those folks. That was really fun.
She follows us on Twitter.
Yeah, Kristen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully get to actually talk sometime. But
Yeah,
we've traded DMs before about events, so super cool.
Yeah.
And thank you for getting the book. So
of course. No, it's great. You'll love it.
I can't wait. Oh, we all had envy watching you on your adventures, so that looks super cool.
It
And
really
it's
fun.
like, do we do Tokyo? I mean, if we went,
I don't know.
it just, we'd have to like save up. I would want to go like see Toho Studios, the good folks make Godzilla, and
Mhm.
Super Aya Productions, the folks that make Ultraman, and go have a lot of ramen and go see like those robot fighting dinner cafes. And
That's amazing. Yeah.
I mean, like we could do this. Like it's just need to make sure the trial calendar is clear and just go for it. But
Is that next year?
but
Tokyo? 2 years. Oh,
2 years.
okay. Oh,
Had some
Yeah,
time to save up.
time to save up, which is
okay.
necessary. And Also, I would not want to fly like 16 hours in coach. So like that's
Yeah. I'll say I feel like when we went to Tokyo the last time, we might have done sort of a premium economy situation that, was nice, but I honestly have no recollection of the flight being uncomfortable or great either way. So I think, Tokyo is so memorable that just the flight there is you might have to endure a few hours of discomfort, but it's so fun.
yeah, I'm very tempted just because of the fact Star Wars has pulled so much from Kurosawa and Japanese pop culture and stories that and filmmaking style. It would be fun to go to that because that's a huge compliment to the source material. I mean, I wouldn't go on a hidden fortress tour, but I would want to go tour the countryside and go see things. So,
Yeah, it's beautiful. Have you
well,
been to Japan, Greg?
No, never. I've only been to Hong Kong as a child, so that is definitely on my list of places to visit, and to go for purposely for that kind of event would be just a bonus, right? So that'd be sounds like a ton of fun.
it would be a ton of fun. My grandfather went several times. So, first time was the surrender. Uh, and then they went 2 or 3 more times for playing tourist. He and my grandmother hosted 2 different Japanese exchange students. So again, quintessential American experience of, help fight in a war and then befriend them and have people come over. One of the students actually, like she's in her 60s, like, came halfway across the planet to visit my grandfather in his last year. So,
nice.
so yeah, I would love to go to Tokyo. Huge fan of. It'd just be neat to go see.
It's really fun.
Well, with that, let's talk about something else that's really fun. This episode. So one of you put down as the first topic, resisting arrest.
Yeah.
Let's break that down for us.
Yeah, well, it just struck me when Din was just kind of struggling with those 2 troopers, that he looked like he was obviously resisting arrest, which is obviously a felony and specifically California here where we are. But of course, resisting arrest depends upon the arrest being lawful. Which seems like probably not a very lawful arrest when they've just kind of apprehended him and are taking him to a quote unquote debriefing room. Seems pretty sketchy and extrajudicial in a way that probably does not, it probably justifies him resisting the arrest too. But as I was looking into it too, I realized that there's a California statute that prohibits the brandishing of a deadly weapon while you're resisting arrest too, which I didn't realize. That's kind of an interesting appended crime that you can commit, especially when you steal a knife from the stormtrooper's boot and start cutting things and stabbing people. That seems like if the arrest were lawful, of course, he would be criminally liable for that. But.
Yeah, but this looks more like a kidnapping.
Yeah, for sure.
Or the Gestapo trying to take them away. So it's like, yeah, punch them,
yes,
stab them. You self-defense is justified if someone's trying to kidnap you.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Greg, any thoughts on that as our northern outpost?
No thoughts on that one. Have some thoughts on the second one though.
Oh, yeah, let's take it away because the issue of adverse possession of property for Moff Gideon's lair on Mandalore, which again that raises the military outpost type of elements. But Greg, you first, and then Stephen. Let's talk about adverse possession.
So it's been a little while since I've looked at anything adverse possession. I did once upon a time teach it at one of the local universities here. So one thing that immediately jumped out at me was the number 2 in the 5 factors you have here. First one being adverse possession by, I'll just go through it, adverse possession by the plaintiff of the property under claim of right or color of title. Okay, so this is by the very nature of the possession here. so may be satisfied. Number two, the possession consists of open and notorious occupation of the property in such a manner as to constitute reasonable notice to the true owner. So here's where I think you might have a lot of issue here about open and notorious, and this has played itself out. I've never litigated a case about this before, but I've I've had colleagues that said that this one can trip them up, along with the 10-year time period. But this one here is like, this is a hidden base, right? Was it open and notorious, but it was supposed to be a hidden base. So if I'm trying to adverse possess, like say have my parcel of land beside some other parcel of land, and I'm just not so open and notorious means that everyone can see it essentially. Like this is very obvious that I am putting my shed here and asserting my squatter's rights, as this is colloquially called. So that's that one. I think that it's for that kind of civil case to someone makes an application for adverse possession, that they might have a problem there. Possession is adverse and hostile to the true owner. Well, yeah, it's adverse, right? at the very least, and the possession is uninterrupted
hostile too, like openly, like weapons blazing hostile.
yeah. The possession is uninterrupted and continuous for at least 5 years. So this is a little bit different from our local our laws here. This is 10 year. We need 10 years of adverse possession. So I take it this might have differences between jurisdictions. So we don't know how long they've had this. If this is a recent base, or he built this shortly after the purge of Mandalore. And then the plaintiff has paid all taxes against the property during the 5-year period. So I'm not sure Gideon has paid any taxes on this property to rightful authority, but there was no rightful authority. So
yeah. The only thing it occurred to me that that it seems like there's sort of a tribute system going on with those other remnant commanders, and that someone seems to be paying someone something, and so I wondered if you could characterize that as like sort of paying a tax. But that is kind of that's a creature of California statute, paying the taxes, and then we do here in California have that shorter 5-year period. I was also in the open and notorious thing kind of it was interesting to me too, because yes, it is a hidden kind of secret lair for sure. But it also struck me that what if he argued that he couldn't do something that was more sort of surface because of the way how inhospitable the surface was, and that everything in Mandalore had to be underground. And so it was as open and notorious as it could be, with sort of TIE fighters streaming out of that crevasse. It's pretty open and notorious. But I agree, it's definitely seems to be like designed to be a hidden base.
It might be open and notorious. And I say might because anyone who went down there didn't return. It's open and notorious if they shoot and kill anyone that approaches them. Now, they can't warn anyone else because they're dead, but that would, if he has logbooks to say like, look, these guys came down and we shot them, and then this other group came down and we shot them. It's like, well, you've just documented murder. Thank you. We're going to add that to the war crimes trial. But that I would say if they're opening fire on people, that is open and notorious.
It's open and notorious, but I'm not sure if the last part of the test, so as to constitute reasonable notice to the true owner, if they're dead, like it's like that shooting the messenger type. Well, I mean, that's probably not the proper way to apply that expression, but you know what I mean, right? It's like, because
they're near the Great Forge, so which is problematic. And again, good thing it's a forge, so it could survive something crashing near it, bursting into flame. So again, we're going to call that good, and some helpful plot armor. But yeah, there's a lot there, and it's fun to think in terms of adverse possession. Well, let's get
a little 1L property law
yeah.
from time to time.
So I'm one of those guys that loved R5-D4 when I was a kid, just because he was a red droid. He looked different. I do prefer having the what looks like an eye on the droid, and he's got the 3 little buttons that don't emote the same way R2 does, but I've always liked that droid. I really like we get to see him have some hero moments in this that include hacking and scampering around into the base. Stephen, can you talk us through these issues with the hacking issues with R5?
Yeah, obviously hacking is a crime. In California, we have a state law that makes it a felony to knowingly access without permission data and to wrongfully control, to use that data, obtain that data, such as a map of a secret base, I guess wouldn't be included in that. You can also, it's also a crime to access and then take data in addition to just using it. So that's separate sort of charging. But also federal law sort of famously has many statutes, federal statutes that prohibit hacking and unauthorized access of computer systems. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which was designed to prevent, was initially passed to prevent the hacking of government websites and banking institutions, but now pretty much covers all computers, including personal computers, phones, laptops. And also the Stored Communications Act, which focuses on the access of data when it's like resting on a computer. And those two statutes have a lot of overlap. So federal prosecutions often charge people of that kind of conduct with violations of both statutes. So the scumping of R5D4, that little like tube thing he plugs into the wall, that's certainly unauthorized access of a secure computer network, and would be, I guess, unlawful, especially if it's a government computer network. That would be a really bad thing for him to have done. But it also occurred to me, I didn't jot it down, that that Din also says, you know what, buddy, I'm going to need you to do this crime for me, which is a very clear solicitation of a crime and accomplice liability. So there's a lot of little tentacles going on with that fact pattern.
Greg, since neither Stephen and I are attorneys in Canada, what kind of computer hacking laws do you guys have? I would believe something similar to us, but can you opine on that at all?
Yeah, it's been a while. I remember I used to know the answer to this, but I apologize, I didn't look this up ahead of time. But we do have, of course, you know, like some kind of laws against it, whether in the criminal code or otherwise. So it's what, you know, it's just kind of funny, you know, these open data ports you see all the time in Star Wars. It just makes hacking so easy. But yeah, we definitely against the law here to hack.
Yeah, so I have friends in the Coast Guard. Their computers do not have thumb drives. So and that probably had to be learned the hard way by some government, you know, breach that took place. And it's not like we just didn't have something recently happen. So I'm looking at you, Discord servers. But yeah, it'd be interesting to do a little comparative law analysis.
Well, just Josh, just speaking of comparative law, I apologize, didn't have this ready when we're talking about adverse possession, but I noticed when I was reading down the list of the tests that in the notes about adverse possession, that there's something different here. I remember there's something different about when I used to teach it, and there are a few small differences, and I'll just touch on just run down really quickly. So a lot of it's the same: open, notorious, adverse. We have exclusive, actual possession, and continuous possession for the entire 10 years. And that's where it trips up people. It's like sometimes it's not continuous for the entire 10 years. But we also have one more: peaceful. It has to be peaceful. It cannot be have been done by force. So maybe just, I don't know, nature of how you know, maybe Canadians, we don't want hostile takeovers to qualify as adverse possession. So just a little tidbit there on the differences on how adverse possession works in our jurisdiction.
That is fascinating. I remember continuous from law school and in old cases. I don't remember peaceful.
Yeah.
But if somebody,
everything's better in Canada. Everything's so zen and nice.
you know, on the flip side, let's just say there was some like white nationalist group that made or a cult that made an encampment on somebody's, you know, somebody who owns like 500 acres, and they carve out two acres and they build their little encampment, and they're doing like military exercises and drills. that would not be peaceful.
Right.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
probably not.
no, I'm just thinking like the Montana situation, or Wyoming, something big, with lots of land that could happen on. So let's talk about the critical habitat protections for the Mandalorian farms. Stephen, this sounds like you.
Yeah, every time I see like green things and little animals, I think of environmental protections. And it struck me that they had that. I went back and watched that conversation again about the Mandalorians who had survived on Mandalore, and they talked about how they didn't that Bo-Katan didn't realize that after those centuries of civil war that anything could still survive on the surface, that all the population of Mandalore was protected in those domed cities, and that the rest of the surface of the planet was kind of a wasteland. And that she didn't realize that it was still possible to have those species. And the Mandalorian who's there and says that, no, we have these kind of caches across the planet where we have food and shelter, and it's just all the species that have been dormant, and then once we all left, they have kind of taken root again and rebloomed. So it struck me that if there's these little very discrete areas where the species are recovering, that might be something where if there were sort of a Mandalorian federal government or state government, it might designate those areas as critical habitat for endangered species that are at the brink of extinction. Although they seem to be recovering now that the ecosystem is coming back into balance. So all those plants and of course the federal and state environmental statutes apply to both plants and animals. So all those plants that were regrowing in that little grotto that they would probably be at least endangered, which means that the species is in danger of extinction, although they might also be threatened, which is just they are foreseeable to become endangered in the near future without intervention. So if those little areas are designated as critical habitat under the Endangered Species Act, the federal government then requires all of its agencies to consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service anytime there's planned federal action on those properties to make sure that there won't be any adverse modification of the habitat that would endanger the species that are there or depend upon it. And if there's a species that's actually in the critical habitat, any modification of the habitat has to go through regulatory processes to make sure that the animal isn't actually harmed, which might result in an impermissible take of the species, which has all sorts of criminal and civil penalties associated with it. So it just struck me that it'd be fun to have like little critical habitats all over Mandalore to nurse these dormant species back from the brink of extinction and back into to proliferation across the planet.
Yeah. Do they have farmers? Do they have people who know how to farm?
Yeah,
Cultivate the land. I mean,
yeah, it's interesting because he said that they planted farms, and the grotto, to me, I wasn't sure if he was referring to the grotto because that didn't seem like it was like a cultivated, like planned farm like you would expect, having like rows of plants and stuff. That seems sort of like just a wild ecosystem. Yeah.
yeah, interesting. Greg, any thoughts on this stuff?
Not really. I know, like we have similar laws here, like in the provincial and the federal level for protection of the endangered species, whether animal or plant life. So I found your analysis very interesting there, Stephen.
I could see, like, as they rebuild, like farm subsidies, like, encouraging cultivation of the land and restoration. I mean, the planet's a big Superfund site that you have to crack the glass, remove the glass. There's good dirt underneath the grass where life can bloom. The cleanup is how to do that. And moreover, because you just don't want to shatter glass. Then you have shattered glass. So like, how do you cut it? Do you need a lightsaber, to cut through it and then raise it up and dispose of it? Anyway, that's where my mind went for the cleanup operation that you're going to need that would create lots of jobs, there's no shortage of things to do, but if they're sitting on a mountain of Beskar, they have currency that others want. So they can, I mean, they are resource rich, so they can reestablish an economy, trade, and get what they need to rebuild their world. So I don't know if the writers will think like that, but it is kind of fun to engage in that. Which brings us to the topic of government procurement. And Stephen, talk us through this. Oh,
That was a Greg.
Yeah, I could take it. Yeah.
You did. Oh, talk us through it, Greg, please.
Okay, so government procurement. So this is something where I work in my day job. Is I do a lot of procurement. I'm in a procurement branch for a police service here, and I'll just read. I thought it was interesting. The conversation between Captain Tiva, I think I'm saying it, or Captain Tiva. And so he's like, let me get this at the very end of the episode. Let me get this straight. You want to work for the New Republic. And Din says, on a case-by-case basis, an independent contractor. And then Tiva says something to the effect of, this is against regulation and won't get approved. And Din responds, which is why you won't tell them. Just to note, Tiva is played by Paul Sun-Young Lee, who is Canadian, who's part of a hit Canadian comedy series called Kim's Convenience. He played the father. So it's really super cool. And he's a big Star Wars fan to see him in this kind of role in such a big show. So anyway, props to him. But so this government procurement. So what he's proposing is that Din is proposing that you go pay me under the table, or maybe not pay me under the table, but don't go up your chain of command to get this authorized as an authorized purchase with the government, because we've seen how the New Republic responded before when Tiva asked, we need to help these people. It's like, well, you can't do that, don't want to do that, or whatever, right? So in government land, your procurement is subject to certain procurement rules, and I could only reference Canadian the way we do it in Canada here, and I'm sure there are some similar concepts or even legislation, whether local or federal or whatnot, in the United States. But we have something called the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, and and we have also a New West Free Trade Agreement as well. But these free trade agreements are what they sound like. At the international level, the goal is to reduce barriers to trade. But in the Canadian Free Trade Agreement and in our domestic ones, they're to reduce barriers within the country, right? And they set out certain rules on competitive procurement about it as well. And the idea here is that you have to treat all suppliers or potential suppliers equally, whether they're domestic or international. So here, this would be the Captain Tiva trying to procure the services of a supplier of services, Din, for bounty hunter services, I assume. I don't know exactly what kind of work he's going to be doing for him, but there's going to be public dollars spent on this, I take it. I don't know how he's going to get the money, right? So he's going to try to get the money, but it might not be authorized in his chain of command, but he's going to get the money somehow, and he's going to pay him, right? So the idea behind these free trade agreements is that because these are public dollars, you want an open, transparent, and predictable environment for businesses to try to win these government contracts, right? Because the alternative is that, without these kinds of rules in place for procurement, is that you're going to have people paying, awarding contracts to their buddies or to, their wives' companies or whatnot, right? So that doesn't make for a very good environment for competing for these government contracts when it's just about these kind of relationships or whatnot. So here you have what's called a sole source that's just going to award it to him. And not because there's some kind of, are they old buddies? No, you can't really say that, but there's some kind of sole sourcing going on here. And it would likely be, I think, that given the amount of work that he's going to be doing for him, that it's going to be above what they call threshold amounts. So above a certain threshold amount under the Canadian Free Trade Agreement is $100,000 or so, that they're called covered procurements, mean that they fall under the rules, but they're under it, then they don't fall under the rules. So in this case, then if he's going to sole source it, even if he doesn't get chain of command approval, he might be okay if he could reasonably justify sole sourcing. And some of these, the ways you can justify sole sourcing is that there's no other reasonable alternative supplier. There might be some kind of emergency brought by unseeable events. And there's also a catch-all for national security, in this case, probably galactic security or something like that. So as we go down that kind of road, so how is this going to work for Teva to potentially justify this sole source? Is there no alternative, reasonable alternative to hiring Din for this work? Is he the only one that has a has a force using sidekick? I don't know. Is he the only bounty hunter that is trustworthy? Because we've seen mostly bounty hunters in Star Wars canon as kind of sketchy or something like that. Or is this such a matter of public security, national security, or galactic security, that given Teva's suspicions about something else going on here, that he's the only one you can trust? So this is so they don't want to bring it out to open tender to everyone to be doing this kind of work. Maybe that'll work, but there has to be some kind of justification for sole sourcing this kind of work to Din. Otherwise, you can fall afoul of these free trade agreements and then potentially get some kind of complaint from an alternative supplier, another bounty hunter, saying that this should have been open to public tender or something like that, or just not properly justified sole source contract, whatever. So anyway, so that is just a little bit about public procurement and what kind of issues that Captain Teva can face in sole sourcing these services to or from Din.
That's a lot to think about, because the United States has a history with privateers. Granted, it's way back at the beginning of the country, Revolutionary War type situation, or fighting Barbary pirates type situation, that we hire people to go out and fight. We have things like Blackwater and other government contractors, but there is a process for those government contracts. The idea of a forward military base that's remote, hiring someone, is problematic. Now, if everything is of a small dollar amount, or a dollar amount that's like not the cost of an X-Wing type of thing, something that's not, let's just say, problematic, that would make it a little easier. But they're basically discussing doing something off book, which means they're going to cook the books in order to make sure that this stays off the radar, because Teva doesn't trust his own superiors, who are just letting a problem get worse.
Maybe not necessarily off the books, Josh, but he says that you're not going to tell them. Then them can sorry, that's my wife just getting excited. I think the Oilers scored just recently. Anyway,
cool.
Sorry. Telling them might just be, I'm not going to get approval, but this will be accounted for anyway as public dollars spent in the proper course, but not I might not necessarily get approval from my chain of command. So if like this gets found out, it's disciplinary action. I'm sorry if you heard that. Another goal, I think. I think 2-0 Oilers now. So anyway, so I think not going to tell them could be that instead of cooking the books, as in doing funny accounting.
And that idea makes me feel better. And maybe they, as a forward base, they have that kind of authority, that kind of discretion to contract out the harder projects that they need flexibility to do. So there's a lot to think about there. Stephen, do you have any thoughts?
I was just thinking about how the payment for that first gig was just that relic of the IG droid's head that's hung over the bar. So that seems like a pretty easy thing to just have, like a little in-kind exchange that wouldn't necessarily raise any red flags. But Yeah. So, Greg, did you identify really strongly with the Tim Meadows requisitions officer character from a couple episodes ago?
Yeah,
In line of
spitting
work?
image of my boss. No, no, no. She'd be really mad if she found out I said that.
Just
No,
kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah, because he seemed super that character seemed very by the book in a way that was obviously kind of bureaucratic and negative
mhm.
in a way, I guess, that was portrayed. But I could see how that character would not be on board with hiring a bounty hunter to track down Imperial remnants in the name of the New Republic. But this might also sort of play into the thread that we identified previously about how the New Republic seems to be so preoccupied with doing things the right way and sort of in a way that's good and doesn't fall into the traps of the empire and sort of corruption, that they might be missing opportunities to actually to thwart the first order before it even sort of starts. So it's sort of this interesting dichotomy between doing things by the book but then having the flexibility to play things a little more fast and loose when it might be beneficial to the greater good.
Which goes to the issue of, Tim Meadows' character listening to the former Imperial. This is kind of like having the Nazi supply officer. It's like, really? You think you're going to get good advice from them, who's saying things like, maybe they should feel a little oppression. So they see the value in signing up. It's like, they're getting bombed by pirates. Your reaction is to do nothing and that they should suffer. That is an Imperial way of thinking. Maybe you shouldn't have her on your team. Maybe she should be crunching numbers someplace else or mopping the floor, something that you have a war criminal go do, as opposed to something important. Compared to the fact that we want people with flexible abilities to go out and hunt down the threat that's still out there that we don't want to talk about. So I applaud the idea of doing it. It's kind of like seeing a Nazi hunter in the 1950s or 60s, or watching X-Men First Class when a younger Magneto is going around just killing Nazis. I'm okay with that. That did not bother me. I don't want Mando just knocking them off. They should stand trial. And if he has to fit them into the cargo compartment of the N1, that's fine. I don't care if they're uncomfortable. That doesn't bother me. Any thoughts on that? Because I'm way on board with this plan for season 4. Like, sign me up.
Well, Mando always gave him the option of bringing him warm or cold. So maybe he's just going to bring him in cold, and maybe he's just going to be the head.
Or just like at the end of a tow cable at the back of the N1 Starfighter.
Yeah.
Just
let's think about our car. We have a roof rack with a cargo box or something. He's gonna have like something. Yeah. He needs a family car, man. He's a dad now.
Yeah,
he went from the minivan to a sports car. Like that's stepping backwards from. I mean, that's very midlife crisis for a parent. But
yeah, big divorce dad energy there.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, the vacuum of space to freeze them. That's problematic. We want them brought in.
Maybe cheaper than carbonite, but
yeah, and again, I'm kind of, they're the bad guys. But that does raise the issue of the Darksaber gets crushed in the fight. Now, it's Beskar, so it could have totally survived that explosion. Kyber can come from like a star, so like that should survive. You got an armor. They can rebuild that bad boy, because why destroy the merchandising possibility of the Darksaber? I got the FX lightsaber. It is a ton of fun. It's a good toy. Greg, we talked about the constitutionality of, is there a secret constitution or an unwritten constitution for Mandalore? People still seem to follow Bo-Katan post Darksaber getting crushed. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, and about the unwritten constitution, this could be, it could be, I think it's interesting to query or just go back like at what has been said about the Darksaber again, is that I don't think it was ever said that this is the only way to rule Mandalore, right? This is one of the ways, or maybe the prime way that especially the warrior class, because we know that what's her name, Duchess Satine, was that her name? Yeah, she was the rightful ruler of Mandalore, even though a lot of the warrior class, if you will call them, did not like the way she ran the government, or adopted a pacifist position or policy rather. So I'd say like it's the Constitution, if this is an unwritten constitution or a constitutional norm or something like that, is that this could be one way to rule Mandalore, but it's not the only way to rule Mandalore. It might be the way that it trumps all others. If you have that Darksaber, then everyone wants to follow you, and this is in an unwritten constitution, then you are the ruler of Mandalore. But there can be other ways to rule Mandalore. I know for narrative purposes that it was very symbolic, is that we don't need to be fighting over this trinket, as Gideon called it, this trinket or this artifact or whatever you want to call it, that has maybe sown division from us before. Bo-Katan leads because she is worthy of being followed. And I think Din had a really good line there in the previous episode, where our people, referring to the covert, don't care about what the Darksaber means or words to that effect. What matters to us is loyalty, honor, or whatever he said. So I think it's one of those things there that even if it's not in this unwritten constitution, they are willing to follow her. Now, if we want to go back to the old laws, the old Mandalore laws, and say, okay, so how can we legitimize this? Or since the society's been destroyed anyway, maybe we can just rewrite the darn constitution itself. This might be the third Mandalore Republic, or whatever you want to call it, right? So it has but this is a very interesting narrative choice to destroy the Darksaber, which I'm sure had almost everyone going when it was destroyed. But about it being made of Beskar, like, is that where in canon? Because I've heard that before, but I don't know where in canon that was mentioned.
Book of Boba Fett,
Was it okay?
When Mando shows the Darksaber to the armorer, it's referenced that it's a quality of Beskar he had never seen before.
Oh, okay. It's interesting because, like, I remember in that same scene is that when he showed her the spear, that she said that we don't make Beskar into weapons, and then she melted down the spear and then made the mithril, whatever you're going to call it, for Grogu there. So it's interesting that it's at least that Darksaber, the hilt, is at least partly made of Beskar.
Yeah, well, they make Beskar weapons all the time. Like, it's just because it could shoot doesn't mean that it's still Beskar. Or the whistling birds, like, there's Beskar. So
okay.
So she didn't like the spear because it could pierce Mandalorian armor, which seems to be run afoul of what they believe for their belief system about how they commune with their weapons and armor and what that means to their culture. So I can accept it. And the Darksaber is supposed to be like 1,000 years old, from the first Vizsla that was a Jedi who had been a Mandalorian. And that's about all that I totally know. But there's the fact that you need the Force to be able to set the crystal in the right way. So can the armor reforge it? Because I was getting Lord of the Rings vibes of the sword that shall be forged anew, and thinking in those terms. And is Grogu the one who's going to reset the stone in order for the Darksaber to work again? It's still a little awkward for him to hold, but like, where are they going to go with this bad boy?
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Greg, one of the things you said too is that when this dark saber was destroyed, that Moff Gideon had that line about how Mandalorians are weak when you take away their trinkets. But Bo-Katan's response was Mandalorians are stronger when we're together. And so maybe that's a reference to the fact that she's united the tribes and brought Mandalorians together, and that is a more meaningful indication of leadership and sort of the center of the government than the dark saber was. So maybe that had me thinking that maybe they had grown beyond the need for a dark saber to unite the people, and that they're more open to being a society that works together as opposed to just being all these warring tribes. It also reminds me of course, the constitutional peasant in Monty Python, that you can't expect to wield extreme supreme executive power just because some watery tart threw a sword at you. That, you know, the whole like myth of having the sword that anoints you as the leader. But yeah, interesting.
But it's helpful in a fight. So like, which is why it's like, you know, the Solicitor General to the United States can wear a sword. I don't know if they do or not. They got a special uniform and everything. I don't know if they show up that way to the Supreme Court to argue ever. That, you know, Stephen, if you have the outfit, I understand, but that's just weird. But we have traditions like that. So the idea that I hope they reforge it, and because it's a useful weapon, that she knows how to use it well. She's able to defeat enemies well. They're going to need it with the threat that's coming at them. So why take an option off the table? That said, everyone's getting along now. And one of my questions was, is Axe Woes raising Ragnar? Because at the end, when they relight the forge, Ragnar's standing next to Axe. Is he now the guardian? Where's the kid's mom? Was he a foundling and adopted, or is it a biological son? Like, how's that work? But with, you know, dad gone, is Axe playing dad now, which would be a very nice, you know, capstone to the initially hostile relationship the two of them had, and then they learned to get along, and now one raises the other's kid. So again, there's beauty in that. But that does raise the issue of adoption. That so way back in season 1, the armorer tells the Mandalorian, you're as the child's father, bring him home. We now have this almost religious adoption ceremony, and Din asks to officially, hey, I'll adopt the kid. So it's now Din Grogu, which means part of the Mandalorian culture has the last name first thing going for it. Kind of like the Bajorans on Star Trek. But Bo-Katan Kryze, that's still like first name, last name. So again, it's not consistent.
Or maybe a Mandalorian culture is more diverse than we know, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, like for, you know, like Asian cultures, like we go last name first, and then you see that, you know, when you're watching the Olympics, that's how their names are on screen as well. So the family name and then the given names.
Yeah, I was about to say there are cultures on Earth that do that. So maybe the covert, they do it that way, and the non-helmet group does it the other way. So, and everyone can get along and live happily ever after still. So, which is part of having a multicultural society. But in California, it says, you know, the law says that an adult can adopt a minor who is not married. And that's California Family Code section 8600. However, a prospective adoptive parent or parents shall be at least 10 years older than the child. And that's also California Family Code section 8601. Mathematically in California, that adoption could not work because the kid is older than the adult. Our law does not account for different species that have different lifespans adopting each other. That problem doesn't happen here. But
That's hilarious. I hadn't thought of it. It's really funny.
what does happen here is guardianships. So somebody who, because of an injury or a physical condition, they need a guardian to take care of them. Grogu can fall into the needs a guardian category because even though he's 50 or 52 by now, I'm not quite sure, he's still a child according to his species. So he needs someone that can raise him and take care of him. So that would be a guardian relationship in California if I was trying to make this legally work. And they might have, it'd be fine to say, from your perspective, your religion, sure, father and son, we're down with that here. Legally, it's a guardian relationship just because that's the only way we can make this work, because this problem doesn't happen with human beings. It's like I'm adopting the 100-year-old turtle, it's just as a kid type of thing. Which is weird, but if you're a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan, maybe that could work out. Still, it doesn't happen. But that's how we could at least legally make it work. Now, just on the fanboy side of things, did anything else jump out at you about this episode, whether it's the fight or the Praetorian guards committing child abuse because they were just going to murder Grogu?
There was so much action in this episode that I just loved. I loved Axe Woves' crashing the ship into the base. That was so cool, and the fights were really fun. But to be honest, I loved that the episode and the season ended on such a peaceful, rustic, domestic note that you so rarely see that in Star Wars, and it was just so sweet and really fun way to end this chapter of the story. And there was no like post-credit like spooky thing threatening anyone. It was just like a nice happy ending. It's so nice to have that in Star Wars once in a while.
With a written deed.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I meant to mention. I was relieved finally that someone has conveyed property in writing.
Grief didn't go, this is your land. Like that didn't happen. It was, this is your land and here's the deed, big boy. We actually built you a cabin. It's ready to go because we knew you would be back. Go for it. There's frogs too. Yes, Greg.
How about the other land that it was ceded, quote unquote, to the Mandalorians? Don't maybe the Mandalore is still using that as some kind of base or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, operational platform. I mean, it's good to have the flexibility. I mean, maybe living on Mandalore is going to be really hard for a long time. So having that outpost, maybe that's where kids live.
Yeah.
And so they're, and they have interstellar travel, so they can jump back to the planet and go, hey, we're home after several days of work. We've been cracking open mountains of glass and removing them from the planet. So, because that's going to be labor intensive to clean up the Superfund site. Imagine 3 Mile Island, but bigger.
Planetary wide, right? So
yeah, it's just they got glassed. It's just like the Mojave Desert, glass. It's just ugly. It's just there's a lot of digging to go do. So that would be roughing it, as opposed to maybe they get pre-manufactured homes and they have those on Navarro, and that's where they do the most of their living while they're rebuilding.
I was trying to remember when Grief gave ceded the property to the Mandalorians. Was that in exchange for them providing protection to Navarro?
No,
it was just
it was an award.
Right? Yeah, it was an award. You saved our hides. Here you go. Yeah. This is you can live here now. You're welcome to stay. And maybe some of them do. I mean, they can spread out. And so again, they have storytelling options.
Well, speaking of storytelling, one thing that I quite appreciated, and I thought it was kind of funny with some fans complaining about, was the red herrings that were thrown out. Like the stuff to kind of have you guessing, like the shots, the shot choices of the armorer, and then of Axe Woves, and then maybe your suspicion, because of the title of the spies, plural, right? So, and then if some people were kind of upset, it's like, why did you do all that? Well, because they already sowed some seeds of doubt, not seeds of doubt, but they already gave us the backstory of, and I think Bo-Katan explained that we've always been fighting each other, right? We've always been fighting each other. So it was a good way to throw in some red herrings to think, oh, is someone going to betray someone? But I'm glad it didn't go down that trope, and that they came together at the most critical moment to fight, the common enemy, fight for their home world. So I really like that. And it's, with red herrings, as someone who used to teach, and of course we remember from law school, in your fact patterns, there's always red herrings there to try to throw you off, right? And I think these were something that I enjoyed, and glad they subverted the expectations of someone betraying the group, because I would have really not liked that if it was Axe Wolves or the armor, because it's kind of tropey that way, right? So another thing that I really enjoyed about the way the writing of this is that I partly expected, I don't know why, I partly expected that, well, they're now all home, so they'll now all take off the covert, they'll take off their helmets and they'll all be one again, right? But they didn't, and this is okay. And you saw in that final shot when, when they're all in the forge and relighting the forge, that they're mixed in together, the maybe call them secular Mandalorians and the ultra orthodox Mandalorians, and no one seems to have a problem with it, at least right there. And hopefully this is one thing that they'll go forward, that, yeah, they were suspicious of each other, and then Gideon said they're sworn enemies, but you could be different, you can believe differently, but you can all come together and be one people and respect each other's cultures, but still be the same people. So I appreciated that they didn't also fall into the trope of, oh, we're just all going to be one, and we also have to be homogeneous to be able to get along as a people. No, it's like there is diversity here in their beliefs, and hopefully this means that going forward that there won't be fighting over that anymore.
It's a great observation. Thanks for saying that. And it's a good thing to point out too, because in Star Wars, worlds are so monolithic. They're portrayed as having sort of a monoculture, and it's like the jungle planet, where it's like a complete jungle, and that's in sort of underscoring that Star Wars is really kind of about diversity and being stronger together, even though you come from different backgrounds. I think it's great. Good observation. Thanks.
It's, the part of the American experience has been promoting the great barbecue. Like, we all get together, and you have the community get together, and there's everything from very different backgrounds, very different cultures, because we're all on the same team now. We're all neighbors now. We're all together now. And you can have churches of different kinds on the same block, and everyone live in harmony, knowing that, yeah, there's like, oh, he's Presbyterian, like, so big deal. It's just, ooh, Episcopalians are running around, like, that's not a thing. So being able to have that diversity, and especially, again, if we see Axe is Ragnar's guardian now, he's taking in a kid who's going to wear his helmet all the time. And it's like, okay, that's what he does. It's like, his dad and I had a rough relationship, grew to respect each other. I'm now raising his kid because he died saving us. Here we are. Like, I'm fine with that. And that is a great message from Star Wars on being united despite having differences, recognizing commonality.
And I think one thing, oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just about to say, I think one thing that helps solidify that, and I might be reading into it a little bit, but we've been told that the stories are they're like they seems like they have very strong oral traditions in the
Mhm.
Mandalorian societies on both sides, the covert and the secular. So it's the story that matters for a Darksaber, and the stories passed down on the covert and the like. So I think there's two big stories here that could have brought them together even closer after, obviously, the battle itself, but Paz's big heroic sacrifice at the end of the penultimate episode, right? They're going to be probably singing songs and telling stories about that for ages. And then Axe Woves and his almost self-sacrifice there, that was amazing, like and even there I was guessing, okay, so is he going to be the spy, he's going to betray them and take this ship and no man, he almost killed himself, but he managed to get away, and that was really cool how he got away. So I think it's part of those stories that, despite the differences in their practices and in the way they look, because one's always wearing their helmets, one's aren't, they have these stories to bind them and to forge, metaphorically forge this united culture together, and partly, in combat, of course. But yeah, I think that's very important for the Mandalorian story. At least that's the way I read it.
No, it's a good way to read it. And I mean, like, I feel the same about it, that they're united. They had a common threat. They now all want to go home, and they'll take their shot of living together and rebuilding their world. And it's frequently in Star Wars, like, governments completely fail. And you don't have, like, people coming together in a functional society. It's all these ragtag groups just trying to get by and defeat the evil empire. The idea of seeing a planet become functional, and it's like, yeah, this is what we do. Like, it's barbecues on Thursday. Hope you can make it. Like, bring a potato salad. Don't put raisins in it. Like, all of that would be nice to see, to have that kind of functional society, as opposed to everything is just strife and discord, and there's some ugly underbelly of crime lords run this place, so you're going to need to accept the drug dealing. It's like, no, that doesn't have to be the situation. It could just be okay, which is the sense with Hope. And Grogu let the frog live, so hopefully he's changed his dietary habits as well. But we'll see what the future brings. Stephen, did they talk about a Mando season 4 at Celebration?
No, there was no Mandalorian panel at Celebration. Apparently Jon Favreau has confirmed that there is going to be a Mandalorian season 4, but probably it seems like maybe not until 2025 at this point, because Ahsoka's coming out at the end of this year. And of course, they did announce that the sort of Filoniverse culmination cinematic event of all these live action series and animated and live action series is going to happen on the big screen. So I imagine at some point they'll have to turn their attention to developing that film. So who knows when that's going to be.
Yeah, I bet it's a version of Heir to the Empire, but that's just me, because the Ahsoka trailer has her say Heir to the Empire. They're just teasing the fans with a very well-known story. So
yeah, and I wasn't in the Ahsoka panel. I couldn't get into that one, so I only saw the abbreviated trailer that was on the live stream. I didn't see the Thrawn reveal in the main trailer, so looking forward to that.
yeah, I agreed. So the future's bright. Did you get to see the Skeleton Crew trailer?
Yes.
What does that look like? Because that one's not online.
It looks super fun. It looks like do you remember like Flight of the Navigator or Short
Yeah.
Circuit or something like that, where it's a bunch of kids who are like on the run with Jude Law. It looks really fun. It's like there was fully a shot that you remember from from those 80s movies of them running through a dark forest with like the flashlight beams bouncing as they run. It's very that energy. It looks really fun.
Okay, so it's Goonies,
It's
Flight
like
of the Navigator.
Amblin. Yes, it's that that vibe for sure.
awesome. Wow. That is, I can't wait. Can't
It's
wait.
really good.
So okay. Well then we'll call this a recording. So everyone, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us on this adventure. Wherever you are, please leave a review. We appreciate that. And until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky.